Hey guys, Ashley here. Welcome back to my channel. I am standing in my entryway and this is where I have installed my tall board and batten. I do have a previous video on this if you want to see how I did it with the step-by-step details. And today I'm taking it a step further and I'm going to be adding additional trim to the inside of the boxes to give this more of a updated traditional look. I will show you guys all the tools I'm going to be using, the materials I'm using, and then we're going to take it step by step so you can do this at home as well. So let's get started. As far as tools, we're only going to need a few. I have my 18 gauge brad nailer here. I'm going to be using 1.5 inch brad nails, and these are 18 gauge, which is what this brad nailer is designed to take. And then obviously I just have my pencil and my measuring tape, and then we'll also be using my miter saw. So then I've got my trim molding here, which is the finger joint base cap molding. And this is a primed pine, so it's pine wood that's already been primed for us. And I bought it in the 8-foot lengths. So to get started, we are going to start by measuring our first long board. And so I'm just using my measuring tape to go from the bottom corner. And I'm trying to get this exact because we are doing mitered cuts. And so it looks like we are at 63 3/4 inch. And while I'm here, I'm gonna take the measurement of the opposite side too. Even though in theory, all of these should be the same length, I know for a fact that they're not because my walls, my floors, my ceiling, nothing is perfectly level or plumb. So I will be taking an individual measurement for each one because each one will probably have a slightly different measurement, which means it'll have a slightly different cut. All right, so I have brought my trim piece out to my miter saw, and something that I want to point out is that on this trim piece, you have a fat side of the trim and then you have this thinner side on the front. Typically, the fatter side is the side that you will be pushing up against the existing boards that are already there, or that's the side that typically is facing left. So whenever I'm cutting, I just want to be mindful of that. Now to get started, before I even measure, we have to do our first mitered angled cut. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen up this knob on the front. I'm going to pull in the lever on the bottom, and I'm going to turn my miter saw until it clicks in at the 45-degree angle mark, which right here in my miter saw, all the angles are marked. So it's at 45, and I'm going to tighten the knob back down. And then I am going to, what I love about this miter saw stand is it has these pieces at the end that pull out that give you a little extra work room. So I'm going to pull that out as far as it will go so it will hold my trim piece while I'm making this cut. So all I'm doing here is pulling this down and getting it right to the edge so I'm not wasteful with how much I'm going to be cutting off. And then I'm going to make my cut. All right, so that gave us our first angled cut, as you can see here. And so now I can do my first measurement. When I do this measurement, I'm going to be measuring from the outside corner, which is on this fat side. So I'm not measuring from the inside. I'm going to make sure I use my measuring tape and measure from this outside, like the highest point of the cut I just made. And then now I need to turn my miter saw in the opposite direction. If I leave my miter saw at this angle, I'm gonna have two angled cuts that are going in the same direction. And the top of my board needs to be angled like this, whereas the bottom needs to be the opposite. So I'm gonna turn it, and then on the other side here, I have again 45 degrees, locking it in. So my pencil line is going straight down, but my angled cut is gonna obviously be going at an angle. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing my blade down and I'm making sure the blade is gonna be cutting from the top. So my angle is gonna start where my pencil mark is and then go down. So let me do the cut and then I'll show you guys. So when I'm done, you can actually see the pencil mark is here. So I actually started my cut a hair above it. So this piece might actually end up being too long to fit, but I'd much rather have too much than not enough. So if we take this in and dry fit it and it is a hair too long, I will come back out and I will just do another sliver of a cut off of here. All right, so this is the scrap piece from my first cut, and I'm gonna be using this to do my first top horizontal board. So I'm gonna start with my first angled cut to get started. And then from there, I'm gonna do my measurement, which was 19.5. Once I have my first 4 trim pieces cut, I like to dry fit them in place just to make sure I don't need to trim a little off any of the pieces and to make sure that none of them are too short, which would leave me a big gap in the mitered corners. So let's take a look. All right, so this one is a little bit too long. I'm gonna take it off and I'm gonna cut off just a hair and then we'll get it back inside to dry fit it. So once you get your trim pieces just dry fitted into the space, you're really wanting them to be snug. That would be ideal. There were a couple places I even had to use my fist and kind of like really kind of beat them into place. Otherwise, you could be left with a seam that's too large to be filled with caulk or nail hole filler. So just do your best to try to get the joints really tight. So right now, this hasn't even been nailed into place yet. It is just dry fitted in here. I did have to take a few pieces out to trim a hair off because they were too long. Now that it's in place and I can see that it fits, we're gonna use the brad nailer and get it nailed in place. This board here is a little bit bowed. I can almost stick my finger under it. So when I'm nailing it in place, it's really important that I'm pushing it and holding it against the wall snug. That way the nails go in, it kind of sucks it to the wall. I did end up moving my miter saw right outside my front door, and it made it really easy to come in and out as I measured each opening and then cut the trim piece and then dry fit it into place to make sure it was cut correctly. And I continue to do this for all of the upper boxes. measuring, cutting the trim pieces, and then getting them all dry fit into place. At the end, I came back and nailed them all to the wall. So now that all the trim is installed, we need to do the finishing work. And so I want to share with you guys my go-to products. This is the only thing I use when doing finishing work on accent walls. So the first one is the DAP Dry Deck Spackle. I just call this nail hole filler. I love this. It goes on pink, it dries white, it's really easy to use. And this is what I'm going to use to fill in all the nail holes in the trim itself. And then I love this Alex Flex trim caulk. I believe they call it crown molding caulk, but this is also my go-to. I buy it in the white, and this is what I'm going to use where the trim touches the wall and then where the trim meets up against the existing boards that we already had on the wall. And this is just gonna give it a really seamless finish. And so you won't be able to see all of these like shadows and lines, and it'll look like all of this wood is one piece. Now you'll also see me when I start to apply this, I am using an electric caulk gun. That's not necessary. I love the one that I have, and I'll link it below for you guys, but just a standard caulk gun will work just fine. And I'll have all of this stuff linked below, like all the other tools and materials I'm using in the video. And I just use my finger to get a little bit out, and I rub it into the nail hole, pushing it in the hole and trying not to leave too much extra on the outside of the board. Once I've got the nail filler in, I move on to caulk. I caulk the inside and the outside seams, and then I do go back with my finger to just rub it into place and to rub off the excess, which I'm just wiping onto a paper towel. All right, we're down to one of the very last steps, and that is sanding down the nail hole filler that we used on all the nail holes. And something that I've switched to this year is, instead of using sandpaper or a sanding block, I actually just get a wet rag and I do wet sanding. It makes a huge difference in my opinion. You have no mess, and I feel that it leaves like a smoother, softer finish on the wood. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm just looking here for the nail holes that we filled, and then I just take the rag and just gently, very gently just rub, and you can see where it's the dried nail hole filler is coming off of the trim, but it's staying in the hole that we filled. And like I said, the best part is there's no dust falling on the ground and there's no extra mess that I have to clean up. And to finish the wall, I just go back and paint the trim boards. As you remember, these are primed pine, so they do have a coat of primer on them. They just need their final coat of paint, which I use the same white paint that I used on this wall. All right, so there you guys have it. If you want to install this entire wall from scratch, be sure to check out my first video where I do the board and batten, and then you can finish it off with the details from this video. Now, I have everything linked below, including the first video, all the materials that I used and the tools that I used. And then if you guys have any further questions, leave them below. Make sure to check out my other accent wall videos. I also have beginner tool tutorials if you are just getting started, and make sure you guys subscribe, hit the alert button so that you'll be the first to see my next video. Bye guys.